Welcome to Brent Locked In, the series where we find out how Brent has shaped remarkable people from the borough. My name is Jessica Mensah. I'm a theatre director who grew up in Brent and a member of the Blueprint Collective. Today, I am joined by theatre director and producer Nicolas Kent, who for 30 years was the artistic director of the Tricycle Theatre in Kilburn, now known as Kiln Theatre. He wasn't born in Brent, but he's one of the only people to have been given the freedom of Brent. Hello, Nick, and welcome to Brent Locked In.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well in this lockdown. I'm sitting in the sun in the country, so I can't complain.
Oh, that's lovely, lovely. Right, so how's lockdown been for you?
Well, I've got on with quite a few theatre projects that I was in the middle of. I'm hoping theatres will reopen. Yeah. I don't think they'll probably do so until a vaccine's discovered, but maybe I'm being pessimistic.
I'm sure. Hopefully they shall be opening soon. And what effect has the pandemic had on your artistic practice? As you said, you're currently doing a couple of projects.
Well, I'm working at the moment with Mark Thomas, and we were going to do a show at the Edinburgh Festival and the Arcola about COVID-19. But now we're doing it as a podcast at the moment for the Wellcome Trust, and it's going out at present as part of the Wellcome Collection. And we're doing 6 podcasts for them. And then we hope eventually to take it on stage.
Oh,
and also I was going to do a play that I did many years ago at the Birmingham Rep called, I was going to do it at the Birmingham Rep, but I did it many years ago at the Tricycle, called Playboy of the West Indies. And we were doing that as a musical next March. But obviously that's been cancelled too for the time being.
Okay, I see. Oh, those sound exciting. And where could we find these podcasts as well that you're currently doing?
If you go to the Wellcome Collection .org and go to stories /stories, welcomecollection.org/stories.
And we start most of these interviews by asking people how their parents came to live in Brent. Yours didn't live in Brent, but they did come from overseas. How did they end up living in Hampstead Gardens suburb?
Well, my mother didn't come from overseas. She was English. My father was a German refugee from Hitler and came over in 1936, changed his name after the war because my mother didn't want a German name. He was called Khan, and he moved from Chalk Farm to Hampstead Garden suburb just before I was born in 1945. Near enough to Brent. It's not far away from the Kilburn High Road.
Yeah. And so did you grow up in the Hampstead Garden suburb as well?
I did, but I went to boarding school, so I was in the country a lot of the time too.
And what was your boarding school like? You went to Stowe School, is that correct?
I went to Stowe. I didn't enjoy it much.
You didn't enjoy it?
Very anti-Semitic at the time, and I was half Jewish. I didn't quite know whether I was Jewish or Christian, and it was all not good, really.
And so how did you find yourself in Brent?
In Brent I did a number of productions around the country and residences in different theatres like the Liverpool Playhouse. I ran the Watermill in Newbury. I worked with a touring company based in Bury St Edmunds. And then in 1976, I co-ran the Oxford Playhouse Company based at Oxford, but was predominantly a touring company. And we went around the country, and we happened at one point to do Playboy of the West Indies, which was I'd commissioned from Mustafa Matura.
Yeah.
And we toured it all over the country, and then we landed up at the Tricycle for a London run. It became very successful there. It had 2 runs there, and during the second run, the Tricycle had lost its grant at the time. The Arts Council had taken the grant away, and the artistic director resigned, and he was very keen. I took over, as with the board.
Yeah.
And I went to an interview, and I was asked the question, what would I do if the appeal to the Arts Council was unsuccessful and the grant was finally taken away? And I said, well, I would fight on and try and make the theatre survive.
Aww.
All the other people interviewed said they'd leave. I think the board didn't quite want to go through another appointment process a year later if the grant was taken away. Yeah. So almost by default, I got the job, I think.
Fair enough. And what was society like growing up for you, either when you came to Brent or even living within Hampstead Garden suburb? Was it quite, what was, I guess, were you living through a cultural, political, social revolution, or how would you describe society at the time to you?
Oh, I would say it was very post-war and placid. I remember rationing, funnily
Oh,
enough.
wow.
Couldn't even go and buy sweets. Um, I was brought up in a sort of middle-class household, and I think, you know, a lot of the multiculturalism that now exists just wasn't there. It
Mm.
was very strange to see black people or Asian people in London. And if you wanted a meal that wasn't fish and chips or shepherd's pie, you had to go to Soho.
Oh,
It was
wow.
literally so. I mean, London's become a world city and very cosmopolitan. And it just wasn't like that at all. Almost all my friends inevitably were white because one just didn't get a chance to meet any black people or Asian people.
Mm.
You know, we were in a monocultural society at that time.
Yeah.
Began to be some immigration, obviously, in the late 50s, but that was, you know, 13 when I was 13, 14, 15, and I was at boarding school.
Do you have a favorite place in Brent from the time you got to spend here?
Well, I would say the Tricycle Cinema,
The Tricycle.
because I got it built and I love it dearly. I think Brent's great. I mean, it's 92 languages are spoken in the borough.
Yeah.
There's a huge diversity of different places about different amenities and different things to do in the borough, which are great. I love the little park opposite the Tricycle. Queen's Park's
Oh, Queen's
wonderful
Park.
down there, and up at Kingsbury's great. So there are lots of possibilities. You know, I
Yeah.
watched the Willesden Library being built, which was such a formative place for Zadie Smith. All sorts of
Well,
different places. Brent, it's people that are great about Brent rather than the places.
your work is deeply political, and you are known for working on verbatim and tribunal plays at the Tricycle, such as The Colour of Justice, The Stephen Lawrence Inquiry, and Half the Picture. Did you have a political awakening when you were growing up, or what inspired you to create political work?
Well, I was very inspired by, I think, politically, by the film Zed,
Okay.
which was made against the Greek colonels by Costa Gavras. I had the great joy of meeting Costa Gavras a few years ago, and it was a very formative thing to see
Yeah.
at that time. And I got involved with at the time, Equity was trying to further the work of black actors, and they had an Afro-Asian committee, and I was put onto that committee because I very much, when I was at Oxford Playhouse, we tried to do as much integrated casting as it was called in those days, colorblind casting.
Mm.
And I've always hated racism. I mean, I grew up against a background of being racially discriminated against and, you
Yeah.
know, just teased, nothing enormous. But I just hate racism. And so that um, when I took over the Tricycle, it was with a black play, a West Indian play. It got a huge popular response. And when I took over, my predecessor, Ken Chubb,
Yeah.
who had set down the most forward-thinking policies for this theatre. He'd done terrific work in that way, in that the policy of the Tricycle was to do work for, by, and with the ethnic minority cultures in the area,
Yeah.
plays, work for and by and with women, and work for children. And those were his policies. And I suppose I brought in the political element, but it took me a time to do that.
Yeah.
When I started at the Tricycle, there were two hot wars going on. There was the war in Ireland,
Mm.
between basically the civil rights movement and the Ulster Unionists, and a huge amount of bombing both on the mainland and in Northern Ireland. And obviously the war for the ANC for liberation in South Africa.
Yeah.
And those both spilt over very much into Brent communities, the Irish community, because Brent was an Irish stronghold, a huge Irish population, and the black community, who were very much affected by, for instance, the way Margaret Thatcher would not even prescribe the ANC as a terrorist organization rather than a freedom fighting organization.
Yeah.
And so um, my beginning of my time at the Tricycle was trying to reflect and bolster those two communities. We did a huge amount of black work
Yeah.
and a huge amount of Irish work, and they were the mainstays, and that's what our audience liked. And it was wonderful. The Irish audience came to see the black work, and the black audience came to see the Irish work.
Yeah.
And we also did some English plays in there, but that was the mainstay. We were enormously culturally diverse. So I commissioned a lot of work from black writers and Irish writers, including Winsome Pinnock, Sheila MacLeod, Roy Williams, who was unknown at that time, and his early plays, even Kwame Kwei-Armah, a whole lot of writers, and a lot of Irish writers like Christina Reid, Bill Morrison, and younger Irish writers too. And we started with Half the Picture, looking at the Arms to Iraq issue and the way the government had broken its own guidelines, sales of arms. And we then did Nuremberg, because it was the 50th anniversary of the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. And then we went on the Stephen Lawrence scandal happened, that the family had to campaign for so long for public inquiry.
Yeah.
And having started to do these inquiry plays, we went on to do the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, which eventually was on television, and I'm still in touch with Neville Lawrence and Doreen, and which is very nice. Neville phoned me the other day. And that was a big success for the Tricycle, because it toured nationally. It was seen in the National Theatre, and it went on BBC Two television, getting the highest audience on a Sunday night. Eventually, we did the Afghan trilogy, which I did with Induru Basingham. We toured the States, and we did it for the Pentagon, and we also did it for the Chief of the General Staff in this country.
Amazing.
So the politics, in a way, came later. The politics, to begin with, were politics of nationality, race, and color, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that we were very multicultural theatre, and we were known in London for being that. And eventually, we became known as a political powerhouse. But I suppose I'm proudest of the legacy that we had a large black audience. We had later on a larger audience, Asian audience. It took a time to get the Asian audience, because the population over the 28 years I was at the Tricycle changed. It became, black people started moving out and Asian people started moving in. It was quite interesting. And also the Irish started to move out too. Our audience composition changed, but it was a very loyal audience, I must say. I wanted to reflect that community, and I wanted the people to use it all day long and to regard it as their theatre. I think the protests of the name change came out of people identified with that theatre, with the Tricycle. And many, many people had grown up through that theatre. Quite a lot of actors had come to shows when they were 5, 6, or 7, done workshops, then graduated into the Tricycle Youth Theatre, and then became professional actors. People like John Boyega, appeared on our stage. Jenny Jules had come to theatre since she was a child. Zadie Smith had come to the theatre very often and knew it. There were people loved that theatre, and they felt it was theirs.
And what does theatre mean to you?
I love theatre. I think theatre is a wonderful experience. It can change people's lives. I've met so many people who saw plays, and it made them become something different. I met someone who also had come back from being abroad and wasn't certain what to do, and saw another play I did, funnily enough, an Athol Fugard play, Statements After the Arrest Under the Immorality Act. And she became a nurse because she saw that play. It moved her so much, and I only by chance met this woman about 6 years later when I did another play in the same theatre, and she sought me out and she told me the story of how she'd seen statements after the arrest under the Immorality Act, and it had made her decide that she wanted to become a nurse.
Oh, wow.
So I think theatre has an enormous power for change. I think what it does brilliantly is it creates empathy with different people and different emotions. And you begin to understand people. And people watching the Stephen Lawrence play, white people sitting on bench seating next to black people and sharing a black person's experience of how obscene the murder of Stephen Lawrence was. And they had to sit next to a black person, and they felt complicit to some degree in that murder. It wasn't they that had done it, but they felt any intolerance was complicit, any bigoted nature was complicit, and it made people think. And I think that's what theatre does so well. It makes you question why you're here on this world, what you're doing, and why you're doing it.
The Tricycle had a reputation for developing young directors and writers. What do you look for in a young director?
Well, that's a good question from someone who is a young director. Well, you're young anyway. I don't know that.
Young.
I look at why people want to do it. I abhor, the thing I hate most about the society we've turned into is the celebrity culture.
Yeah.
And if people want to do it for the glamour, or they want to do it to meet famous people, or they want to do it to become famous, then I'm not interested. I look at someone who wants to do it because they have a burning desire to tell stories, to communicate with people, and to make this world a better place.
And when did you sort of discover that you wanted to become a director? How did you?
I studied at Cambridge, and I did start probably for many of the wrong reasons. I was working behind the scenes, and perhaps I started because I thought I wanted to make my mark a bit. But I started with a play I really believed in at that time, which was not a new play by any means, Look Back in Anger, which was the John Osborne, which is dated.
I love that play.
It's a great play, but
I got to play
it's dated enormously. And at that time, it was about 1956, 1966. Yeah, it was about 15 years old. And I did it then, but it still had a lot to say. That's the first play I ever directed, and I loved doing it, actually. And I got the bug from that, I think. And I started working with actors, and I love actors. I think it's a privilege. It's like working with a tribe. You know, there are people who let down their defenses. And I'm probably someone who has rather a lot of defenses and inhibitions. And I love the idea that people can put themselves on stage naked, really, in a way, and just allow people to look at them and look at their inhibitions, albeit playing someone else. But I think that's a terribly brave thing to do.
And it's probably not an easy question to answer, but what do you think the legacy of your time at the Tricycle Theatre was?
Well, it is somewhat easy to answer, I think. I feel good about what we did for what is now called BAME. I think it's good. We gave a lot of opportunities to Black, Asian, and multi-ethnic directors and actors. We also always had a Black education director or an Asian education director. We tried, we never possibly got integrated our permanent staff or not, but we tried hard to do so. And we certainly, our acting company was very integrated and as very diverse, and as was the choice of plays. So I'm proud of all of that, but I'm also proud of really helping to put verbatim theatre back on the map. It was always there. We didn't invent it, but we made it more fashionable. And I'm now on the A-level syllabus as someone whose work can be studied. Now, I'm not proud of that bit, but I'm proud of the bit that I went up to a school in Bedford
Yeah.
and saw 7 young people who, because they'd studied verbatim theatre, not necessarily my methods, but they'd also understood other methods of doing it. And they were all doing plays about different subjects for their A-levels. And they'd chosen to do a play about mental health in schools and why young people were committing suicide. And it was a very powerful piece. And they did a number of other very powerful pieces. And I'm really proud that there's an accessible method, and I'm one of the people being studied. There are countless other people, hundreds, but we're all part of that accessible method of telling young people that it's not that difficult to do theatre about social issues, humanitarian issues, and political issues that need explaining, showing, and engaging with.
And 2020 has been Brent's year as London Borough of Culture. The last time Brent had a platform like this was probably the Festival of Brent in 1993. Do you remember it, or did you hear of it?
Well, we took part, I think, in the Festival of Europe.
Oh, okay.
Within the Festival of Brent. I'm a very committed European. I think Brent's it, but I think Brexit is not it. And we did a children's thing, which I think dovetailed with the Brent festival, but I know at the time it was low key. And I know that this festival has been hit by COVID-19, which seems so unfair.
Yeah.
I believe it's moving to Lewisham next year. And they're going to be hit by half of that too. So it's not easy. And I'm sad for Brent that that's happened.
Yeah, we all are.
Yeah.
And have you returned to Brent since leaving?
Yes, I've been around. I've not been to the Kiln, but I have been to Brent quite a lot. I have a dentist in Brent, amongst others. Closed, of course, at the moment. But I go up and down the Kilburn High Road quite often. And we created the Cloud Bridge there, which unfortunately has got a lot of graffiti on it. And we helped. I mean, I'm proud of we also got that opening into the park from the Kilburn High Road, which was our idea at the Tricycle, and we got the lighting done in the Kilburn, and we got the library moved onto the High Road. We did a lot. I think when I was at the Tricycle for the community, we were very engaged with Brent development and trying to get Brent and Camden to engage together, because there is a border which runs right down the Kilburn High Road.
Yeah.
Yeah. We even managed to persuade people to empty the rubbish on the same day. They used to empty the rubbish on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at Brent, and Tuesday and Thursday at Camden. Used to just blow across the road on the other days. So the Kilburn High Road was permanently rubbish strewn. At the time, oh dear, my postman's having real trouble getting the post through the door. Leave it there, just leave it there, and I'll take it. God, it's, living in the country is not what it's meant to be.
It's not easy. When you left the theatre, you were given the Freedom of Brent. What did that involve?
Well, it was a terrific honour. I'd worked in Brent for 28 years. I loved Brent, and it was wonderful to be honoured like that. I believe I was the first person. They got an unknown black guy in before they tried to give it to. It was called Nelson Mandela. But the Tory government refused to let them give it to Nelson Mandela because there was a free Mandela concert going on at the Wembley Arena. And I'm absolutely delighted that actually they've rectified that now. And I think there are two of us, me and Nelson Mandela. Well, this is like being the most junior little ant to a colossus, because he is the person. I met him whilst I was at the Tricycle. He saw one of our productions, Cat and the Kings, in the West End, and it was such an honour to meet him. And I think he's the person I would most aspire to be in the world. I think he's absolutely extraordinary. His humanity, his kindness, his understanding, and his political leadership are just astounding. So to be even to be in the same honour as he's got is, I can't believe, and I don't deserve it, but he deserves it a millionfold.
And the final question is, in what ways has Brent shaped you as a person?
Oh, the tricycle shaped me enormously, and Brent, obviously, because we had big fights with Brent to get the funding, and the tricycle burnt down, and we had to get it rebuilt, and it was traumatic. But it's been a life's work, and Brent were very supportive. There were some wonderful chief executives. There was a black chief executive called Merle Amory in the early days when we burnt down, and without her, this would never have happened. The tricycle would never still be there. She was so supportive and wonderful. And I've lost touch with her. It's sad because she did an unbelievable amount for Brent. And Ken Livingstone helped enormously because he was the MP for the local area, and then he became Mayor of London. And he was head of the GLC at the time I was at the Tricycle, and also Mayor of London. He helped us at that time. I mean, we've had a lot of support from people, and I've loved working in Brent, and I love, I wouldn't want to work at a flashy, affluent part of London. I love that Brent is buzzy. It's really great. And its diversity is extraordinary, and that's been one. I've made a huge amount of friends in Brent. So though I may not live in Brent, I live on the borders. I live in Westminster, but in Maida Vale. But Brent holds a great deal of affection for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nicolas, for your time and for just sharing your experiences in the history of Brent. It's been great getting to hear from you. Thank you.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you.